Thank you very much. So my talk is called Hiding in Plain Sight, how the SolarWinds hack went undetected. Of course, it wasn't undetected, right? We know about the SolarWinds hack. So the better title will be almost undetected, I guess, because they were really close to not getting detected. The reason I'm talking about SolarWinds is because I spent a lot of time back in December reverse engineering the malicious update of SolarWinds because I built a decoder for the DNS traffic that was used for command and control. This decoder has been used by certain organizations to identify victims and notify them that they have been compromised, or at least that they were running this Trojanized version of SolarWinds Orion. But I'm not here to talk about this project. I'm here to talk about things I learned while I was reverse engineering the source code for the SolarWinds Orion product, or the Trojanized update. Here's a simple timeline. I'm not sure if you can see it, but as you can see, back in 2019, somewhere there, I don't know exactly when it happened, but the source code was modified, or at least SolarWinds were hacked so that it was possible to inject additional code into their builds. But it was not until in February that the domain, the command and control domain that was used in this first stage, that this domain was activated. And it was not until March that the malicious updates were available for download for SolarWinds users. But basically, this is the timeline. After that, a lot of victims, or a lot of backdoors were installed at victims. And finally, in December, FireEye went public with this incident, because they were hacked themselves. They were a victim. Right, so I'm going to talk about how they hid. So in one way they hid is they named the code or the C# file for the backdoor, very similar to the other files. So in the namespace SolarWinds Orion Core Business Layer, these are the C# files that are in there. And one of these is the code for the backdoor. And I highlighted like the word business layer and Orion because those are very common names in this project. And the only one that has both Orion and business layer, that's the backdoor. So they picked like, okay, let's pick some common names and name our C# files something very similar. So, okay, that's something. Other things they did, that they hid in the source code very well. They named variables and gave them the names that was making sense for SolarWinds product, which was a product for monitoring network or monitoring servers on the network, for example. The green comments there, that's something I've put there. So that was not there by the attackers. So instead of, and this enum was used to keep track of which state the backdoor was in. So instead of saying, I'm in the state to continue running, they called it, I'm in the NetBIOS state. And then the implink means stop, and then we have restart and stop, and a few other commands that were rarely used. So these ones I commented in greens, those are the ones I saw being used. And this is just one example. There are many examples of how they named variables in their source code to make it look like it was part of the original product. The commands on top, the 4 first DNS queries or domain names, those are DNS queries that this backdoor used as command and control. So these are 4 actual queries from 4 actual organizations who had installed this Trojanized update. As you can see, they tried to mimic the behavior of the AWS domains, right? Very similar, like this. You have this app sync, and then where in the world you are, and then AWS VM Cloud, which sounds like AWS something. But as you can see, the first subdomain, like the first part of that subdomain, looks random. but it's not actually not random. So this is what my software did. It took those strings and decoded them into the data, because this is data that's being exfiltrated to the attackers over DNS. So my tool did, it actually decoded this to say that the first DNS request said that the internal Active Directory domain for our organizations is jpso.gov. So it would, and this is the data that was exfiltrated from the by the Trojan to the attackers. So you exfiltrated first the domain name, and then the security products, or where they had the list of security products they looked for. So you can see one victim here ran Windows Defender, and the fourth victim there was running Defender, CrowdStrike, and F-Secure. But still, still they got this piece of backdoor in their systems. But what's interesting here is that this is all the information the attacker had to go on when they picked their victim. And they really handpicked their victims. I would say it's somewhere around 1% of all the Trojanized installations. Only 1% they actually handpicked to say, like, these are the ones that are interesting. The other 99%, they would just stop the back door as soon as they could. There is a diff here. As you can see, in March, the Trojanized software update was available. But it was not until April that they were seeing people reporting in over DNS to this top domain name. And the reason for that is this little piece of code in the back door. So it's doing a get last write time, and it's then adding some delay. You can see this random delay where they took a random number between 288 and 336, and that's number of hours. So it took a random number of hours, and it would wait for that number of hours before the backdoor was actually activated. And it's coming from malware to like sleep for 10 minutes to avoid being executed or avoid being detected if it's executed in a sandbox, for example. This is similar, but not exactly like that. Because it checks the timestamp of the last write time of the DLL in this case. And for you forensics people, the last write time, that's the modified time in the file system. So not created time, it's the modified time. And depending on how you copy a file or install a file, the modified time might be preserved or it might be changed. In this case, it seems like it was actually being preserved. So the modified time would be the timestamp when the file was compiled or signed from SolarWinds themselves. So this means this software would sleep for 12 or 14 days from when this software was compiled, which means that they would probably get through the Q&A or testing that SolarWinds did before they released it, because it wasn't activated. But then once it was out, when 14 days had passed from when it was compiled, it would probably be activated right away. Right, so they should have used, or if they wanted it to sleep for 12 days from when it was installed, they could have used get creation time instead. This is how the command and control worked. So they had different commands. So depending on which response the clients get from the DNS query, the backdoor would behave differently. So these continue commands, which means that the backdoor should continue to beacon because the attackers haven't yet decided if it's interesting or not. But as soon as they decided that, oh, this is an organization we don't want to target, they would send one of these red commands in the bottom left, which means stop beaconing. And it would disable the backdoor altogether. But for a few victims, they selected to respond with this target address instead. And after that, they could also later on supply a new domain name. That would be the new command and control domain that was used for HTTPS command and control. And what I was impressed with is how fast the attackers were able to send the stop commands. Because they got this Active Directory domain, they got the security products, and then as soon as they could, they sent this stop command in order to stay under the radar to make sure that they don't leak or people don't notice this DNS traffic. Here's one real-world example of someone who had installed this backdoor. These are the DNS queries that were sent. So the first DNS query revealed the Active Directory domain. The attacker or the DNS server sent a response in the 8.18 network, which means that it should continue beaconing. And the last octet was actually used to tell the client how long it should sleep before it connects back again. In this case, they say, come back in 1 hour. So 1 hour later, the client comes back, sends information that it's running carbon black. And it now got a response saying, okay, now you can sleep 1 day, but continue beaconing. Then you come back and say, okay, I've already provided you with the domain name and carbon black. That's all I have. So it just sends what I call a ping. So no new information. It will sleep for 1 day and then a ping and then sleep. But finally, they got this 2140 network, which means stop the DNS beacon. So this is all that went out. So over the course of, 3 days, it sent 5 DNS queries. Then it stopped, and then the backdoor was disabled. So most organizations probably would not detect this, and this is why I believe that this backdoor was remained undetected for so long. But of course, FireEye finally detected it. But what if, because FireEye were actually targeted, and they discovered that someone is in our networks doing bad things, and somehow they were actually good enough to trace that back to the SolarWinds compromise. I mean, if they wouldn't have been targeted, I don't think I would have known about this attack. Maybe no one in this room would have. So they were, I would say they were very close to not being detected at all. And just in conclusions, to summarize, the success factors for the attackers was that, they picked class names, variable names, intelligently to blend in with the normal source code. And they had the command and control sleep for a long time before it did anything. And the command and control traffic was just a few DNS queries, like a couple of DNS queries per day. And the attackers terminated non-interesting backdoors super fast. And they only handpicked like 1% of victims to target. Just to make sure that it's not a big compromise. They just pick them to make sure that it's only a few victims who actually get compromised with further malware. So that's it.